Labour promises extra spending on the NHS funded by top-rate taxpayers and by business. But there's still a lot we don't know about how they'd improve things in power. Jon Ashworth, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, is with me now. Welcome and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Andy.
Now, I know, because you say so again and again and again, that you think the Tories are wrecking the NHS. If that's the case, why is it that when you look at the official patient satisfaction numbers for people who've spent a night or several nights in NHS hospitals, they're actually going up? They're higher than they were under Labour at the moment and going up.
But what I look at is the waiting times, which are now at, or the waiting list, which are now at 4.3 million. There's 2.5 million people waiting beyond 4 hours in A&E, 27,000 people waiting beyond 2 months for cancer treatment. These are all targets and access standards which were routinely met under the last Labour government. People are waiting longer under this Tory government, and it's because the Tories, I'm afraid, have been running down the NHS for 9 years, starving it of cash, cutting it back, privatising elements of it, failing to get the staff we need. We don't need... and now Theresa May is saying, we've been running it down for 9 years.
A 10-year plan now.
Yeah, a 10-year plan to clear up the mess that she has made. It doesn't need 10 more years of the Tories. It needs a Labour government to save the NHS.
One of the things we do know about you very clearly is that you would spend a bit more. You're talking about a 4 to 5% annual increase in NHS budgets rather than 3.4% under the Tories. What would be your personal priority for that extra money?
Well, can I just on that point, though, but it's not 3.4%. You've really got to examine the small print on this, because when you take into account the wider cuts to public health budgets, when you take into account the wider cuts to training budgets, take into account the wider cuts to the...
listen, we can all argue about the numbers. I'm accepting
Andrew,
that you're going to spend more. I'm just asking you,
Andrew,
what's your top priority?
It means there's £1 billion less, £1 billion worth of cuts in health services this year. So it's actually about an increase of 2.7% under the Tories. And then the public health cuts which are coming, they're going to decimate community public health services. It means, for example, the equivalent cut means 1,600 less health visitors, 1,700 less school nurses, 630,000 less sexual health interventions. They are deep cuts to community health services coming down the line.
But we have you here as the Labour spokesman. Yeah. I did want to ask you, now one of the areas where people might say both sides have equally failed is when it comes to social care. You have a fantastic headline, a national care service. But underneath that headline, it's very unclear what that actually means. At the time of the election, you laid out various ways of funding it, including a social care levy and so forth. Have you decided how to fund it yet?
Well, what we think the immediate priority is to stabilise the social care sector. I'm afraid it's another sector
you say that's not enough. In your own manifesto, you say that's not nearly enough.
But this is a sector that suffered £7 billion worth of cuts under the Tories over the last
let's look forward. Let's talk about the future.
Yeah, but the social care sector is in dire straits right now. And actually, we've just heard today the Secretary of State on a rival news channel saying that the social care green paper is going to be delayed again. I mean, it's supposed to have been out before Christmas. It's going to be delayed again.
Okay, so again, I ask you, what about your own plan? Because you laid out various funding possibilities. Have you decided how to fund social care going forward?
Well, we are proposing a national care service, as you have rightly said. But when the government come forward with their proposals, we will test their proposals on whether
it's up to you to fund your own proposal.
Well, we know how we're going to fund our proposals.
How are you going to fund your proposals?
We're going to fund our proposals on social care in the same way we're funding our proposals on the National Health Service, by making different decisions on taxation.
So it's coming from general taxation, because you did talk about a funding levy.
For what we call means-tested adult social care, which is the social care which local authorities are asked to provide, which has been cut back by about 7 billion, which means about 400,000 very elderly and vulnerable people are not getting the support that they used to get, which is why we've got these tremendous pressures on many parts of the NHS. We would say we'd put an extra 8 billion into that pot over a Parliament.
What would it actually look like? This is why I'm still slightly confused. Would we actually see across the country a network of, government-funded national care homes opening up for people who need care?
Well, we want to see greater integration, at a local level between social care provision and the local health the local
But would
NHS.
this be new homes, or would this be the current privately
Well,
run and
there's
privately
still going to be a
funded
role
homes?
for privately provided residential social care homes. I mean,
You're not going to try and, as it were, squeeze them out by putting in state homes instead?
Well, I don't think we can go back to the way it was in the 1970s. You've got to make.
Just in other areas, you do want to have state provision.
The language of language of socialism is one of priorities, or to slightly get the Bevan phrase slightly wrong. But you've got to prioritise your public expenditure decisions.
Would it be fair to say, therefore, that you keep something like the current network of private health care homes, but you regulate them better and you ensure that people working in them are better paid?
Well, because the priority right now is to expand access by putting the money back into means-tested adult social care to improve quality. But you just touched upon a really interesting point there. You talked about pay, because a lot of what we need in social care and the wider NHS is a workforce, right? And one of the big problems with what is being announced today is that there isn't a credible plan for workforce. We have 100,000 vacancies across the NHS, 110,000 vacancies across the social care sector. We're short of 40,000 nurses. Nurse numbers are going down, and it's because training places have been cut. They've got rid of the bursary. And Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, is talking about imposing a £30,000 salary cap on staff coming from the EU and elsewhere to work in the NHS. If Sajid Javid wanted to put the NHS first, he would get rid of that salary cap. But instead, he's putting his own leadership ambitions first. That's quite disgraceful.
As we were discussing during the paper review, none of us know what's going to happen next. There could be a general election very soon. You could be Health Secretary very soon. In those circumstances, you've got this Conservative plan, you've got this 10-year plan being announced today. Do you simply rip it up and start again?
Well, I mean, a lot of the announcements in the plan, like trying to expand mental health services, getting better at how we deal with cardiovascular conditions, getting better with how we treat cancer. There is nothing inherently wrong with those aspirations. The point is the funding isn't sufficient and the staff isn't there. We need a staffing plan for the NHS.
Just on legislation as well, however, there's been a proposal from the heads of public health for what's been called a pudding tax. You have a childhood obesity strategy. Obesity is a real problem. There's a strategy for sugary drinks, but not for sugary food. Would you be in favour of a tax on sugary food to try to persuade people to eat less sugar?
I think the so-called sugar tax on fizzy drinks has been a success. I think we should expand that to, for example, milkshakes. Matt Hancock has been doing an interview in the Sunday Times today where he said the answer to the public health crisis like obesity and alcohol problems and so on is more Facebook advertising. That's not the route to go down. I think we have to get serious in this country about taking on the sugar industry and the salt industry, by the way, because high blood pressure is causing a lot of other public health problems as well. We've got to get better at taking on big industry and having that argument.
Has Jeremy Corbyn changed his mind about Labour being a party where basically the decisions are taken by the membership, not by the leadership?
No.
In that case, why, given that 72% at least of Labour members want a second referendum and some sort of similar number want to stay inside the EU, is the party so enabling Brexit and is so against the idea of a second referendum?
The party isn't enabling Brexit. That's not the position
of
the Labour Party. We're not enabling Brexit.
But I was told in previous interviews that if there's an election, the Labour Party's position will be to deliver Brexit.
We're not enabling Brexit. This country had a referendum. The British people voted in that referendum for Brexit. I'm a Remainer. The Labour Party is an internationalist party. I'm very disappointed by the outcome of that referendum, but that's the way the country voted. And yes, we are a democratic party because we had a party conference where our delegates went away, locked into a room for hours upon hours and came up with a motion, a resolution which was endorsed by that conference.
And which your leader is patently and obviously worried about. This notion that we're a parliamentary democracy. This is all about giving power to a parliament. We now have a different proposal on the table about how we leave the EU, the Prime Minister's plan, which people weren't voting on at the time of the first referendum. And lots of MPs think it is right now to give people a chance to vote on what is actually likely to happen, rather than a sort of theoretical long-term Brexit. What's wrong with that?
Well, because the point that we went to the people with a manifesto in 2017 saying we respected the result of that referendum. We are committed to voting against Theresa May's deal. I mean, goodness knows whether we'll actually have a vote on it next week, given the speculation in the newspapers again. It wouldn't surprise me if that's delayed. That tells you how beleaguered this Tory cabinet is. But then, if that is voted down, then it's incumbent upon the government to come forward with alternative proposals and try to renegotiate.
Jeremy Corbyn said earlier in this process that if it needed more time for the negotiation, then Article 50 should be extended or postponed. Is that still party policy?
That's up to the government.
No, I'm asking, is it Labour Party policy? Labour Party
We're not calling for the extension, but it's up to the government to decide how to respond if they lose the vote, if they bring forward the vote, and if they subsequently lose it. I mean, we know that there's been some Tory whips are hopeful that they might get it through. I'm very sceptical, but we have to wait and see.
All right, Jon Ashworth, thank you very much indeed for talking to